Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
You ever walk into a backyard and feel like you're the punchline before anyone even opens their damn mouth? That was me every 4th of July, every Labor Day, every Sunday someone decided the weather was too nice not to fire up the pit. I'd show up with my container of chickpea salad, maybe some tofu skewers I marinated overnight like a sucker, and someone, usually my brother Rick, would greet me with the same dumbass line, "Hey look, the vegan brought rabbit food again." Everybody laughed. Every time. Like it was still funny after 10 goddamn years. And you know what? I laughed too. I played along, smiled, did the whole fake chuckle thing. Because that's what you do when you're the oddball in a sea of beer-guzzling brisket bros and their Pinterest wives posting grilled pineapple like it's innovation. You take the joke, nod your head, and pray they don't start passing your food around like it's a dare. Try Tom's famous lentil loaf, that you won't survive the first bite. Huh. Hilarious. Let me set the scene properly. I'm Tom Landry, 52, divorced, no kids, ex-mechanic turned health coach after a cardiac event scared the meat sweats out of me back in 2014. While the rest of the guys were still tossing back ribs and bourbon like nothing could touch I was chewing on kale and wondering how to rebuild my whole damn identity. I didn't just go vegan overnight either. It was a slow process. First the red meat, then poultry, then fish, then cheese, which honestly almost broke me. I mean, I grew up in Texas. Cheese is practically a blood type here. But you want to know what stung more than giving up queso? Watching the people closest to me slowly start treating me like I was some kind of alien. Like I'd grown a second head made of tofu. My own father once looked at my plate and said, "Son, that ain't food. That's punishment." Hell of a thing to hear from the man who used to fry bologna in bacon grease and call it a country sandwich. Now, it wasn't just the food, of course. People don't mock you just for tofu. It's what it represents. A man changes and folks around him get real uncomfortable real quick. Especially if that change means they gotta look at their own choices. That's what I figured out eventually. It wasn't that they hated the food, it was that they hated being reminded that maybe, just maybe, the way they'd always done things wasn't the best way after all. But I kept coming. Year after year, I showed up. I brought my plant-based dishes and tried to act like the teasing didn't bother me. I'd grill my portobello caps off to the side, far enough that the burger grease didn't drip onto but close enough to still be part of the group. That was important to me for a while, belonging, even if I had to shrink myself to do it. Then last summer something shifted. Rick held his annual ribs and whiskey bash, and by hour 3, they were deep into the bourbon. I'd brought jackfruit sliders that were damn near perfect, smoky, tender, just the right amount of kick. Megan, Rick's wife, ate 3 of them before she asked what was in them. When I told her, her face curled like I'd said I spit in the buns. She didn't say anything nasty, not right away. But later that night, when the music got loud and people got loose, I heard Rick tell someone, "Tom's on that vegan cult shit again. Swear he thinks he's better than the rest of us." That's the line that stuck. Better than the rest of us. Like being mindful of my health, my impact, my ethics, that somehow made me arrogant. Never mind that I'd spent the last 10 years eating their ribs, smiling through heartburn, and laughing at jokes made at my expense. I wasn't trying to be better. I was just trying to be different. But apparently, in our circle, those 2 things meant the same damn thing. That night, I left early. Sat in my truck for 15 minutes before I turned the key. Stared out at their twinkle lights and bonfire and thought, why the hell do I keep doing this to myself? And that's when the idea hit me. I'd never hosted one of these things. Not once. I always played guest. The guy on the fringes, invited but never really in. But what if, just once, the grill was mine? What if the music, the menu, the smoke and spice and smell, what if all of it was under my roof? I started planning that night. And I mean planning. I wasn't gonna serve tofu steaks and hope they'd pretend to like it. No. I was going to craft something. I was going to design a plant-based feast so close to what they were used to, so fucking good, they wouldn't even think to ask what it was made of. I knew it could be done. I'd been studying it for years. Seitan ribs, pulled jackfruit, impossible meat chili with smoked paprika and molasses that could bring a grown man to tears. I'd do it. I'd flip the whole damn table. So I sent out the invites a month later. A backyard barbecue at Tom's place. All homemade. No store-bought patties or limp vegetables. I even borrowed a smoker from Dean, my oldest buddy, who sells meat wholesale but has a soft spot for me. Didn't tell him what I was cooking. Told none of them. They said yes, every single one of them. Even Rick. Even Cheryl, my ex-wife, who I hadn't seen in person since the divorce, but still texted me once in a while when she missed my cornbread. Everyone RSVP'd. They think I'm gonna serve tofu dogs. That's cute. I didn't send some mass text or casual Facebook invite like the way Rick does every time he decides he needs an excuse to get drunk before noon in his backyard. No, I printed real invitations on thick, off-white cardstock, the kind that feels like it should come with a wedding ring or a promise. I wanted it to feel official, deliberate, undeniable. Barbecue at Tom's. Saturday, 6 o'clock. Everything homemade. Bring your appetite and an open mind. I sealed each one by hand, used wax like I was summoning medieval royalty, and mailed them out instead of dropping them in a group chat. If I was going to flip the script, it had to start with the envelope. They were confused, of course. A few called me, some texted. Dean just sent a photo of the invite with a question mark. Rick actually called and asked if I was joking, his voice already thick with suspicion like he was bracing for some kind of philosophical ambush. "What, you gonna serve celery sticks and tell stories about Buddha?" he said, half laughing. I told him, plain as day, just show up hungry and trust me. He snorted, told me I was weird as hell, but didn't say no. It was like that with all of them. Cheryl texted me a cautious, sure, why not, with a smiley face that I read way too deeply into, like maybe she missed something more than my cornbread. Megan replied with a heart and said she was dying to see how this turns out, which felt more like a warning than excitement. And Laura, sweet Laura, my niece who always looked at me like I actually mattered, she messaged me a voice note. "Uncle Tom, I'm proud of you. No one's ever invited them to your house. I'll bring wine. And backup if you need it." I played that note 3 times before I deleted it like it was something precious I couldn't afford to wear out. Have you ever kept a secret just to prove a point? Would you go this far to make people finally respect you? The week leading up to it was pure chaos wrapped in calm. I made it look effortless on the outside, smiling when the neighbors asked if I was finally joining the meat world again, tossing out jokes about new recipes and old traditions. But inside my house, it was war. Seitan ribs took 2 days to prep, with a marinade that required almost surgical precision. Jackfruit had to be drained, pressed, seasoned, and smoked with a mix of hickory and applewood to mask its natural sweetness. I even bought fake bones, yes, fake goddamn bones, to slide into the ribs for realism, because if I was doing this, I was going all the way. The hardest part wasn't the food, though. It was keeping my mouth shut. I wanted to tell someone. Dean, maybe, the one who used to split breakfast tacos with me back in the day, before I started subbing eggs for tempeh. But I knew Dean would either spoil it or pull out last minute if he found out. He's not a bad guy, just loyal to the old ways. He still thinks tofu's a communist invention and oat milk's a personal insult to his masculinity. So I said nothing. The closer it got, the more nervous I became. Not about the food. I trusted my hands. I was nervous about what it would mean. If they loved it and never knew, did that prove me right, or did it just make me a liar with a good recipe? What if they hated it and figured it out too soon? What if it all backfired, and instead of earning respect, I just cemented my role as the weird guy with a grudge? Friday night, I sat alone in my kitchen, the fridge packed tighter than a Thanksgiving turkey with trays and covered dishes and foil-wrapped secrets. I stared at my smoker out back, clean and ready, like a stage before the curtain rises. And then my phone buzzed. It was Dean. A text. Just 2 words. I'm in. I laughed out loud. Not a polite chuckle. A full, unfiltered laugh that echoed off the tile and made the dog next door bark. He said yes. Dean said yes. That smug bastard who once told me my quinoa chili was what sadness tastes like was coming to my house to eat my food and wouldn't even know it wasn't meat. He what? Even Dean said yes? That smug bastard. The morning of the barbecue, I woke up before the sun even had the nerve to show its face, my body buzzing like it knew something big was coming, like it remembered every smirk, every side glance, every time someone said, "That's cute." Tom brought his cardboard burgers again. I didn't drink coffee that morning, didn't need it. Adrenaline had already taken its place, thick and electric in my bloodstream. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, chopping onions so fine they practically dissolved in the pan, and let the memories play like a greatest hits album of humiliation and good intentions turn sour. The time Rick wiped his greasy rib fingers on my cloth napkins and said, "Hey, Tom, these taste like they were made by someone who hates flavor," or when Dean passed around one of my lentil patties like it was a prank gift from a white elephant party. Today was different. Today the grill was mine. The music, the beer, the menu, every inch of it belonged to me. And not just metaphorically. I cleaned that backyard top to bottom the night before, strung up soft yellow lights I'd found in the clearance bin last winter, laid out mismatched chairs I'd inherited from neighbors and flea markets and one desperate estate sale. The smoker, a borrowed steel beast from Dean himself, sat at the center like an altar, quietly puffing clouds of hickory smoke by 6:30 a.m. sharp. Inside, every burner and oven rack was spoken for, every surface covered with dishes that looked like their carnivorous cousins but held no animal within. The brisket? Wheat gluten soaked in broth, slow-cooked for 8 hours, smoked with care. The sausages? Soy protein and beet juice and a whisper of liquid smoke. Even the baked beans had fake bacon, crisped up just enough to fool a Texan on his second beer. They started arriving right after noon, like clockwork. First was Megan, all smiles and oversized sunglasses, carrying a kombucha growler like it was some kind of peace offering. "I brought this because I figured you wouldn't have beer," she said, which I let pass with a half smile because I had 3 full coolers of ice-cold craft lagers and 1 sad 6-pack of NA Pilsner for appearances. Then came Cheryl, looking exactly how someone looks when they're not sure if showing up was a good idea, carrying a store-bought fruit tray like it could act as social armor. Laura followed right after, bouncing in like she hadn't walked through a dozen barbed wire dynamics to be here. Her hug was real, like always, and I let myself breathe for a second longer than I probably should have. Rick showed up fashionably late, naturally. Pulled into my driveway with music blaring from his lifted F-150 like he was arriving at a car show instead of his brother's backyard. He came in shirtless under an unbuttoned flannel, a full beer in hand, and shouted, "Tommy's turning grill master, y'all. Is hell freezing over or what?" Everyone laughed, of course. That same tired laugh they'd always aimed at me. But this time I didn't shrink. I handed him a plate, pointed toward the smoker, and said, "Hope you're hungry." The thing about smoke is, it doesn't lie. You can smell truth in it. You can feel it wrap around your clothes, seep into your hair, turn your stomach in the best way if you're doing it right. And I was. I damn well was. People started drifting toward the grill like moths to a porch light, their eyes wide, their expressions surprised. Rick poked at the brisket slices and said, "Damn, Tom, this looks legit." Dean wandered over next, chewing on something from his plate and nodding like he was trying not to admit it was blowing his mind. Megan whispered to Cheryl that the sausage was weirdly amazing, and Cheryl nodded like it physically hurt to agree. I kept it all moving. Kept serving, kept smiling, kept my mouth shut. I didn't tell them what they were eating. I just let it unfold. I watched them go back for seconds. I watched Rick stuff his face with brisket and go silent for the first time all afternoon. That silence, in particular, was worth 100 speeches. He sat down, looked at his plate, then looked at me, then said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Damn, this is the best brisket I've ever had." I nearly choked on my kombucha. There's a specific kind of high that comes when you've managed to orchestrate chaos without anyone noticing, like holding a lit match in a room full of gas and waiting to see who sparks first. And let me tell you, by the time the sun started dipping low behind the neighbor's cypress trees, I was floating 3 feet off the ground. Everything had gone smoother than I could have possibly planned, almost suspiciously so, like fate had decided to hand me one good day after a decade of being the walking joke at every cookout. Plates were scraped clean. Beer was flowing. People were leaning back in their chairs with that full-belly glow that only comes from salt, fat, and smoke, even if none of it had come from animals. Rick was on his 3rd plate, balancing a rib in one hand and a sausage in the other, like a caveman at a Vegas buffet. Dean was arguing with Megan about whether the brisket had too much pepper, which was hilarious considering I'd intentionally overseasoned it just to see if anyone would call it out. Cheryl was half a glass away from singing "Landslide" into a serving spoon. For the first time in what felt like forever, the tension in my shoulders had let go, and the space between my ribs wasn't filled with the usual pressure of bracing for someone's next jab. That was when I knew it was time. I tapped the side of my glass with a fork, not too hard, just enough to get their attention without seeming like I was trying too hard to make a speech. Everyone turned, all sundrowsy and happy and pleasantly drunk, expecting, I don't know, maybe a toast to summer or a joke about finally using the grill for something other than veggie kebabs. But what they got was me, clearing my throat and staring down every single person who had ever rolled their eyes at my food. I just want to say, I started, and I swear I could feel the mood shift by half a degree, not enough for them to know something was wrong, but enough to make them tilt their heads like dogs hearing a strange whistle. I'm really glad you all came today. It means a lot, honestly. Some of you, most of you, have never been to my place before, and I think we can all admit it's been a minute since anyone trusted me with a grill. Chuckles. Warm, easy. Rick said, "That's 'cause the last time you grilled, the fire department almost got called." More laughter. I nodded. Let them have it. One last jab. Right, I said. But I think I've made up for it today, haven't I? A chorus of yes, a few claps, a loud belch from Dean that I chose to interpret as applause. I let the pause hang there, just long enough to make it awkward. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Because everything you ate today, every single bite, was completely plant-based. You could have heard the carbonation fizzing in Rick's beer bottle. No one spoke. Not at first. Then Megan blinked like she was doing the math on a receipt and said, "Wait, what?" "Plant-based?" I repeated. No meat. No dairy. No eggs. The ribs? Seitan. The brisket? Gluten. The bacon bits in the beans? Coconut, smoked and baked. You've all been eating vegan food all day, and not a single one of you noticed. Rick looked down at his plate like it had turned into roadkill. Dean dropped his fork like it had burned him. Cheryl squinted at her wine like she thought maybe I'd slipped something in it too, just for kicks. "You're joking," Rick said, but it wasn't a question. I shook my head. Not even a little. For a moment, there was just this thick, heavy silence, like the air got molasses pulled and too damn tight around our necks. Then the questions started flying, sharp and overlapping. "You mean there was no real brisket? What the hell was in those sausages? Why would you do that? This is messed up, Tom." I held up my hands, trying to study the room before it turned into a riot. "Look," I said, "I didn't do this to embarrass anyone. I just wanted to prove something. That this kind of food can be just as satisfying, just as real. You all loved it until you knew what it was. So maybe the problem isn't the food, it's what you think food's supposed to be." That was when Dean stood up, slow and angry, his face red not from the beer, but from something deeper, something that felt like betrayal. "You lied to us, man," he said, his voice low and sharp like the first note of a bad chord. You served us fake shit without telling us. That's not proving a point. That's playing us for fools. I started to respond, but before I could, Cheryl, who'd been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly stood up, glass in hand. She stared at me for a long second, her expression unreadable, and then with a flick of her wrist, launched the wine straight at the fence. And that's when Cheryl threw her wine glass at the fence. The sound of glass shattering against the wooden fence was like a gunshot in the middle of a Sunday sermon, loud, shocking, and impossible to ignore, the kind of sound that flips a gathering from celebration to confrontation in the span of one breath. Everyone turned toward Cheryl, who stood there with her hand still slightly raised, her fingers twitching like she hadn't fully processed what she'd just done. The wine left a dark, dripping trail down the fence slats, red as blood, and just as symbolic, and for a second I thought about laughing, just to cut the tension, but my throat was bone dry, and nothing came out except silence. I cannot believe you did this, she said finally, and her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp, clean-cut, and deadly in its clarity. You lied to us. You tricked us like we're your little experiment, Tom. There was a storm rising in that yard, and it wasn't the weather, it was the years, all the years I'd spent swallowing my tongue and laughing off their jokes, coming to their parties with a smile even though it chipped a little more of me away every time. And now that I'd flipped the board and made my own move, now that I'd finally taken control, the rules were suddenly different. Now it was me who had crossed a line. Dean stood next, his mouth a tight line, his eyes avoiding mine. The man had been my friend since the 11th grade, the guy who taught me how to gut a fish and how to lie to a cop when your brake lights were out. We drifted over the years. Life does that to people, but even still, I thought maybe there was some part of him that would get it. I was wrong. You don't mess with food like that, he said, not looking at me but at the empty space where the brisket tray had been. That's not something you play around with. We trusted you, Tom. I wanted to shout that trust had never gone both ways, that every time they smirked at my quinoa salad or made fake cow sounds when I talked about plant-based protein, they were the ones twisting the knife. But no one here was ready to hear that truth, not yet. Instead, I just stood there, feeling the warmth drain from the evening like someone had opened a cellar door and let the cold in. Why does it even matter? Laura said, her voice cutting through the outrage like a damn flare in the night. She stood between Rick and Cheryl now, her arms folded tight, the only person who didn't look like she was 1 second away from flipping a plate. You all love the food. You were begging for recipes 10 minutes ago. Why is it different now? Rick turned to her, his face red and tight with whatever cocktail of ego and embarrassment he'd been swallowing since the reveal. It matters because he lied, Laura. He tricked us. That's not the same as feeding people honestly. It's exactly the same, she snapped back. You only think it's a trick because you're pissed you liked it. It was almost funny, in a tragic kind of way, how fast things could turn. For a while, I thought I was finally part of the group, that I'd earned a place not by compromising who I was, but by being myself and still being accepted. But what this moment showed me, what it screamed in bold, ugly letters, was that they didn't mind me being different, as long as I kept it quiet, as long as I didn't challenge them. The second I did, the second I took my difference and made it theirs, even just for a meal, it became war. As the argument bubbled and cracked around me, I drifted back in my head to the beginning, not the party, not the plan, but the why. The thing that made me go vegan in the first place wasn't a trend or a moral epiphany. It was a heart attack scare in a mechanic's garage on a Tuesday morning. 1 minute I was changing a timing belt, the next I was staring up at the underside of a lift, my chest tight and my vision black at the edges. The doctor called it a warning shot, said I was lucky, told me to make changes or make peace with an early grave. Then came the diet changes, the reading, the documentaries, the stuff that makes people roll their eyes, but saved my damn life. And in the middle of all that transformation, Cheryl left. Said she didn't recognize the man who used to eat steak with his fingers and now measured sodium content like it was gospel. Said I was becoming self-righteous, like wanting to live longer was some kind of personality flaw. And my father, old Derek Landry, God rest him, he didn't say much, but the look he gave me after I brought lentil stew to Thanksgiving instead of helping him carve the bird was enough to burn a hole straight through my chest. He looked at me like I'd broken something sacred. And maybe I had. So when Dean, that same Dean who once shared a flask with me behind the gym bleachers, turned and said, "You fed me lies, Tom." Not food. It wasn't just the words that hit me. It was the weight of all those years, all those people, all those little fractures finally giving way. It was the confirmation of something I'd feared the whole time. Maybe they were never laughing with me. Maybe they were always laughing at me. After the shouting faded into the twilight, after Rick stormed off muttering something about never trusting tofu again, and Dean refused to take any leftovers on his way out, after Cheryl slammed her car door so hard it set off my neighbor's security lights, I just stood there in the quiet with half a dozen untouched beers, the scent of smoked jackfruit still hanging in the air like a ghost that wouldn't leave. The backyard looked like a battlefield. Paper plates abandoned, chairs half-tipped, sauce stains on the deck that looked too much like blood in the wrong light. Laura helped me clean up for a little while, but even she knew I needed space. Before she left, she touched my arm, gave me that soft, knowing look that only someone who'd grown up watching this family devour itself could give, and said, "You did something important today, even if they can't see it." Then she was gone, and I was alone again. I didn't sleep that night. I just paced the hall like an old dog in a thunderstorm, restless and rattled and unsure of what the hell to do with myself. Around 5 in the morning, I made a pot of black tea and sat on the porch until the sun showed up, pale and apologetic, like it had been watching everything from the sky and wasn't quite sure how to face me now. And that's when I decided to visit my father. Derek Landry had been living in Rose Hill assisted living for almost 2 years now, tucked away in a beige building that smelled like Lysol and oatmeal and fading stories. The dementia wasn't fast, but it was steady, slow enough to feel cruel, like watching a house rot one shingle at a time. Some days he remembered my name. Other days he called me boy or that guy with the books. He was a meat man till the end, raised on farm breakfasts and barbecue joints where the smoke seeped into your bones and the waitresses knew your order by the sound of your boots. We hadn't talked much since I changed my diet. Not because he was angry, at least, not directly, but because there was a look he gave me, that same look from Thanksgiving years ago, like I'd broken the code, like I'd stepped outside the bloodline and started drawing my own map. The nurse greeted me with a tired smile, told me he'd been quiet that morning, which usually meant he was either having a good day or drifting too far out to reach. I found him sitting by the window in the rec room, wearing his flannel even though it was 72 degrees inside, his hands folded on his lap like he was waiting for something, or someone, to give him permission to move again. I sat down across from him and didn't speak for a full minute, just watched the way the morning sun caught the side of his face, lighting up every wrinkle and scar like they were chapters in a book I'd only half read. "Hey, Pop," I said softly, and to my surprise, he turned to me without that usual lag in recognition. His eyes narrowed just a little, not in suspicion, but like he was trying to pull my face into focus from somewhere far away. "Tom," he said, and it was so sudden and clear that it made my chest tighten. "You come from the cookout?" I blinked. "How do you know about that?" He chuckled, low and dry. "I still got ears. Nurses talk. Heard your brothers madder than a bull on castration day." I smiled in spite of myself. "Yeah, you could say that." There was a pause, long enough that I thought he might have slipped away again, but then he asked, "What did you serve?" I hesitated. "Plant-based." "All of it." He didn't say anything for a while. Just nodded slowly, like he was chewing on the idea the same way he used to chew through ribs, deliberate, stubborn, with no intention of leaving anything behind. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and looked out the window again. "Bet you made it taste good, though." That stopped me cold. I stared at him, searching his face for sarcasm, But all I saw was that same quiet resolve he used to carry when he taught me how to split wood or repair a carburetor. No frills, no judgment, just observation. I did, I said, my voice thick in my throat. They didn't even know until I told them. He grunted. Figures. People don't like being surprised. Makes M feel stupid. I laughed because it was too true and too sad, and I was too tired to pretend otherwise. Did I ever tell you why I really did it? I asked. Why I stopped eating meat. He didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. Heart scare, I continued. Doctor said if I didn't change something, I'd be dead before 60. And then Cheryl left. Said I was turning into someone she didn't recognize. My father nodded again, slower this time. You always were different, he said finally. Even when you were little. Used to make mud pies for the bugs instead of squashing M. I smiled at that. Guess I've always been soft. He turned his head back toward me, and this time there was something sharp behind his eyes, something real and piercing that felt like the truth trying to break through the fog. You're not soft, he said, his voice firm but calm. You're just not like the others. That's not worse. That's better. And right then, for one brief, impossible moment, it felt like he was all there again. Like the years hadn't taken him away. Like I had my father back, even if just for 60 seconds on a Tuesday morning in a nursing home. But the thing about dementia is that it gives as quickly as it takes, and just as I was about to speak, about to thank him, or maybe just cry for the first time in years, he blinked and looked past me like I wasn't there at all. He looked me in the eye and said, "You're not like the others. You're better." But did he know who I was? By the next morning, I knew the storm hadn't passed. It had only changed shape, like the eye of a hurricane pretending to be calm while the real damage crept in behind it. My phone was already blowing up before I even got out of bed, buzzing with texts like a swarm of hornets stuffed inside my nightstand. Rick sent 4 messages in a row, all in caps, full of the kind of rage you can only stir up in someone who's just now realizing they've been made to feel vulnerable in front of people they thought they had power over. Dean left a voicemail I didn't listen to right away, but the transcription app caught enough of it for me to guess the tone, accusation, betrayal. A whole mess of pride bleeding out in words neither of us would have used before this whole thing turned into some kind of moral battleground over fake meat. Cheryl's message was short. You embarrassed us. Don't expect an invite next year. And Megan sent a single sentence that confused me more than all the others combined. I think you might have been right. Just that. No follow-up. No emojis or softeners. Just those 8 words, floating in my inbox like a life preserver I wasn't sure I wanted to grab. I didn't answer any of them right away. Instead, I went outside, sat on my back deck with a coffee I didn't really want, and stared at the grill like it had betrayed me. It was cold now. The ashes from the jackfruit and seitan turned gray and soft, like the ghosts of real fire. All the tools still hung neatly from their hooks, still carrying the scent of smoke and spice, and all the things that had seemed like triumph less than 24 hours ago. But victory doesn't feel like much when you're the only one left standing in the end. Laura showed up just after noon, unannounced but not unwelcome. She didn't say much at first, just walked past me, grabbed a broom, and started sweeping up the debris from the night before like it was her job. Empty cans, abandoned napkins, a shattered serving spoon that someone must have stepped on during the argument. I watched her work for a while, grateful and guilty in equal parts. "They're being ridiculous," she said finally, without turning around. "You made good food. You didn't poison anybody. You didn't betray the family secrets. You just surprised them. And, honestly, they needed it." I let the silence hang for a second longer before answering. "I don't know, Laura. Maybe I crossed a line." She stopped sweeping and looked at me, her face hard to read. "If they're that threatened by lentils and jackfruit, that's on them, not you. But maybe it's not just about the food," I said quietly. "Maybe it's about me making them feel stupid. About me trying to prove a point instead of just being honest." She sighed and sat down across from me. "They've never had to adjust for you. Not once. Not at Thanksgiving, not at birthdays, not when you stopped drinking or when you started saying no to pork chops at Mom's house. You always bend. Maybe they finally felt what it was like to have to bend for you, and they didn't like the view from down there. I didn't know what to say to that because part of me agreed, and part of me felt like I'd built the whole thing on petty revenge, like the food wasn't the only thing I'd cooked low and slow. Maybe the resentment had been marinating even longer. That night, Megan called. Not texted, called. I almost didn't answer, but something in me wanted to hear her voice, to understand what she meant by that cryptic message from earlier. Tom, she said, sounding tired but steady, I've been thinking about what you did. And I don't know. Maybe I hated it at first, because it worked. I didn't interrupt. Just let her talk. Rick's furious, she continued. He says you humiliated him, made him look dumb in front of everyone. And maybe you did. But you also made the best goddamn brisket I've had in years, and I think he's more upset that he liked it than that you lied about it. That doesn't make it right, I said, though my voice wasn't convincing even to my own ears. No, she agreed. But maybe it means something. That you got through to us, even if it was sideways. The next day, Rick showed up. Not with a peace offering, not with a handshake, just with that look he always wore when something was festering under the surface, some mix of pain and pride and anger so old it had its own name. He didn't sit down. Just stood there in the yard, looking at the deck like it had insulted him personally. You had your moment, he said, and his voice was already raised. You made us all look stupid. You rubbed our noses in it. Congratulations. That's not what I was trying to do, I said, but even I wasn't sure if it was true. The hell it wasn't, he snapped. You planned this. You calculated it. And you didn't give us the chance to choose. You tricked us. You used us. His words hit like bricks thrown through stained glass, something sacred and brittle breaking under pressure. And honestly, maybe he was right. The house was quiet again, finally, after the wreckage of everything that had been said and unsaid in the wake of my so-called barbecue revolution, and the silence was thicker than anything I could have imagined, like grief wrapped in still air. Like guilt settling into the bones of the place. The dishes were washed. The grill scrubbed clean. The chairs stacked. The fire pit cold and full of ashes that still smelled faintly like the meal no one wanted to remember. It had only been a couple days, but it already felt like the party had happened in another lifetime, like I'd conjured it out of spite, and now had to live in the ghost town left behind. I kept asking myself over and over, would I have told them eventually? If things hadn't gotten so ugly, if they'd all just smiled and eaten and gone home none the wiser, would I have ever let them in on the truth? Or would I have kept that little secret tucked away forever, my own private win, the only time I got one over on all of them at once? The truth was, I didn't know. Maybe I'd intended to tell them from the start. Maybe I thought they'd all laugh, clap me on the back, ask for seconds and say, well damn, Tom, you finally got us. But looking back, I think part of me wanted it to go sideways. I wanted them to feel what I'd felt for years, like the outsider, the punchline, the one who always had to explain himself twice just to get half the room to listen. So no, maybe I wasn't innocent. Maybe I'd planned it too well. Maybe I'd soaked my motives in the same slow, burning heat as that jackfruit brisket, smoked down, sugar-sweet and sticky with revenge. And now the guests had all gone home, and I was left chewing on the fat of what I'd done, wondering if it had been worth the bite. The fallout was predictably messy. Some folks stopped talking to me entirely. Dean didn't return my call, not even a text. Cheryl blocked me on social media. Not that she was ever that active, but the silence felt pointed. Rick, well, he sent one more message after our argument, a simple "we need to talk," which I hadn't responded to, mostly because I didn't trust myself not to say something that would make the canyon between us permanent. And then there were the weird ones. The fence-sitters. The people who had something to say but weren't sure what side to land on. Aunt Lynn emailed me a week later asking for the recipe for the magic ribs she'd heard about secondhand. Said she didn't care what they were made of as long as they helped her convince Uncle Joe to stop eating like he was still in his 40s. A guy from my old job, one I hadn't seen in 5 years, messaged me out of the blue saying his wife had gone vegan and he'd been pretending to like her cooking but honestly couldn't stomach it. And could I help him figure out how to make something that tasted like food instead of flavored punishment? And Megan, again, messaged me just 3 words, "You were brave." I didn't answer that one either. Didn't know if it was a compliment or a condemnation, or maybe both wrapped up in the same uncomfortable truth. The question still hung in the air like wood smoke. Was I wrong? Did I violate something sacred by taking away their choice, by feeding them something they didn't consent to eating? Or had I simply opened a door they'd all been too afraid to touch, and now they hated me for showing them it was there? The more I thought about it, the less clear it got. Because food, in this family, had always been more than food. It was tradition. It was ritual. It was power and masculinity and love and identity all rolled into a greasy, overcooked mess of expectations. I didn't just mess with dinner, I messed with them. But I also knew I hadn't poisoned them. I hadn't tricked them into eating something dangerous. I hadn't slipped mushrooms into a meal for someone allergic or served alcohol to someone in recovery. I'd just made a version of their favorite things using ingredients they didn't expect, and they'd loved it until I told them what it really was. The only thing I'd violated was their illusion. And maybe that illusion had been doing just as much harm to them as it had done to me. Still, none of that made the silence easier. None of it made me feel like less of a traitor in their eyes. The irony, of course, was that the whole thing had started because I wanted to feel like part of the group, like I wasn't standing outside the circle every damn time they lit a grill. And now, after my big performance, I was even further out than I'd ever been. It was a few minutes past dusk when I went out to the deck again, lit only by the faint glow from the porch light and the last smoldering orange streaks of the setting sun. The grill stood there like a monument to a war no one wanted to talk about anymore. I sat next to it, the metal still cool under my hand, and watched the embers in the fire pit shift and settle into nothing. Then, finally, my phone buzzed. A message from Laura. "Can I get that brisket recipe?" I stared at it for a long time, longer than I needed to. And just as I was about to type out a reply, another message came in. This one was from Rick. "We need to talk." But I didn't answer either of them right away. I just sat there, watching the cold charcoal like it might flare back to life if I stared hard enough. Sometimes, justice doesn't taste like revenge. It tastes like jackfruit slow-cooked for 10 hours and still making you question everything.